Some of the hardest words to say are the ones we owe to the people we love most. Gordon Leland knew that truth better than anyone. At 62, the widower sat alone one night, finally ready to tell his son what he'd been holding back for years. He typed out a simple apology and hit send, but he'd mistyped one digit. When a stranger replied, "Who is this?" Gordon should have apologized and disappeared. Instead, he answered honestly. The woman on the other end was named Vanessa. She had her own reasons for being cautious. What started as a mistake became the most honest conversation Gordon had experienced in decades. Could one wrong number really give him the second chance he desperately needed? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Gordon Leland woke every morning at 5:30, whether he wanted to or not. His body had kept that rhythm for 40 years, first from necessity when Ethan was small and crying in the next room, then from habit when the house fell silent after Patricia died. Now it was just another ghost he lived with, one among many. The house itself was a ghost of sorts. His uncle Bernard had left it to him 3 years ago, along with a mortgage that was nearly paid off and a list of repairs that would take a lifetime. The place sat on Maple Street in Riverside, a town that had been slowly shrinking since the mill closed in 1987. The house had good bones, his uncle used to say, but Gordon could see the cracks in the foundation, the way the porch sagged on the left side, the shingles that needed replacing before another winter came. He made coffee in the kitchen, where the linoleum was worn through to the subflooring near the sink. The cabinets were original to the house, 1940s oak that had darkened with age and cooking grease. Patricia had always talked about renovating this kitchen. She'd cut pictures from magazines, pointing out islands and farmhouse sinks and subway tile backsplashes. Gordon had nodded and agreed, but the money never seemed to be there. And then the cancer came, and after that, nothing seemed to matter anymore. He took his coffee to the front porch and sat in the rocking chair that squeaked with every movement. Across the street, Mrs. Kepler was already up, pulling weeds from her flower beds with the determined efficiency of someone who'd been doing it for 60 years. She waved when she saw him. He lifted his mug in response. The street was quiet. It was always quiet now. The Hendersons' house, 2 doors down, had a for sale sign that had been up for 8 months. The Kramers had moved to Arizona to be near their daughter. The young couple who'd bought the Masterson place lasted 2 years before the husband got transferred. Riverside was a town people left, not a place they came to. Gordon had never left. He'd been born in Riverside General Hospital, attended Riverside Elementary and Riverside High. He'd done 2 years in the Army, stationed in Germany, and for those 2 years he'd seen a world beyond the valley. But when his service ended, he came home. He married Patricia Chen at St. Andrew's Church on a bright Saturday in May of 1985. They'd honeymooned in Niagara Falls and come back to rent a small apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. Ethan was born in 1998, 2 weeks early, and screaming like he was angry at the world. Gordon had held his son for the first time and felt terrified. He was 25 years old and had no idea how to be a father. His own father had been a distant man, quick with criticism and slow with affection. Gordon had promised himself he'd be different. But promises were easier to make than keep. He'd worked construction then, long hours on job sites 2 counties over. Patricia stayed home with Ethan those early years, and by the time Gordon got home each night, his son was often already asleep. Weekends were for catching up on chores, for mowing the lawn and fixing whatever had broken during the week. There were moments, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, a fishing trip when Ethan was 7, but looking back now, Gordon saw mostly absence. He'd been there but not really present, not in the way that mattered. Patricia had tried to bridge the gap. She'd been the translator between father and son, explaining each to the other. When Ethan brought home a report card, Patricia made sure Gordon saw it. When Ethan made the baseball team, Patricia made sure Gordon attended the games. She'd created the connection Gordon couldn't seem to manage on his own. Then Patricia got sick. It started with fatigue she couldn't shake, then pain in her abdomen that the doctors initially dismissed as stress. By the time they found the ovarian cancer, it had already spread. Stage 3, they said, which Gordon learned meant the odds weren't good. She fought for 18 months. Chemo, radiation, surgery, more chemo. She lost her hair and her appetite, and eventually her hope, though she tried to hide that last part from him and Ethan. Ethan had been 24 when his mother died, just starting his career in Seattle. He'd come home for the funeral and stayed a week. Gordon remembered standing in this same kitchen, trying to find words to comfort his son, and finding nothing. They'd stood on opposite sides of the room like strangers who happened to share a last name. After the funeral, Ethan went back to Seattle. His calls became less frequent. Texts replaced phone conversations. Eventually, even the texts grew sparse. Birthday wishes, holiday greetings, the occasional "hope you're doing well" that felt more like obligation than connection. Gordon understood. He'd failed his son in all the ways that mattered. He'd been absent when Ethan needed him present. He'd been silent when words were necessary. And when Patricia died, Gordon had nothing left to offer. No wisdom, no comfort, no bridge between them. So he lived alone in his uncle's house, taking carpentry jobs when they came. He was semi-retired now, which meant he could turn down the jobs that didn't interest him. Mostly he built custom cabinets for people renovating their homes, or repaired furniture that had been in families for generations. He liked the work. Wood didn't require conversation. It didn't judge him for his failures. Mrs. Kepler brought him casseroles every Tuesday. She was 76, a widow herself, and seemed to have made it her mission to keep Gordon fed. He appreciated the gesture, though he rarely finished what she brought. The Tupperware containers accumulated in his refrigerator until he felt guilty and threw them out, rinsing them carefully before returning them to her porch. "You need to get out more," she told him last week, standing in his doorway with a dish of lasagna. "Join the seniors group at the community center. We play cards on Thursdays." He'd thanked her and said he'd think about it. They both knew he wouldn't go. His phone sat on the kitchen counter most days, silent except for the occasional spam call. He'd gotten into the habit of drafting text messages to Ethan, long explanations of things he wanted to say, apologies for things he'd done or hadn't done. He never sent them. What was the point? Sorry felt too small for the distance between them. But lately the silence had grown heavier. Ethan's birthday had passed 2 weeks ago, his 27th. Gordon had called and left a voicemail. Ethan had texted back, "Thanks, been busy. Talk soon." They hadn't talked soon. They never did. Gordon finished his coffee and went inside. The house felt too big for one person. He walked through rooms that no longer had purpose. The guest bedroom that never had guests, the dining room where he hadn't eaten in months. He ended up in what had been Patricia's study, a small room off the kitchen where she'd paid bills and kept her gardening journals. Her things were still here. He hadn't been able to sort through them, to decide what to keep and what to let go. There were boxes of photographs, books she'd been reading, folders of medical records he couldn't bring himself to destroy. And in the desk drawer, her reading glasses, folded neatly as if she'd just set them down and would be back any moment to pick them up again. Gordon sat in her chair and opened his phone. He pulled up Ethan's number and stared at it for a long time. Then he started typing. The words came slowly at first, then faster. He wrote about regret and lost time. He wrote about being sorry, truly, deeply sorry, for not being the father Ethan deserved. He wrote about wanting to do better, to try again, even though he had no idea if it was too late. His thumb hovered over the send button. His heart was pounding. This was it, the moment he'd been avoiding for 3 years, the moment of truth. He hit send. The message showed delivered. Gordon set the phone down and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It was done. Now he just had to wait. The reply came faster than he expected. His phone buzzed and his heart jumped. He picked it up and read the message. "Who is this?" Gordon's stomach dropped. He looked at the number at the top of the screen and felt the blood drain from his face. He'd mistyped it. He'd poured his heart out to a complete stranger. Gordon stared at his phone screen, reading the message again. "Who is this?" His hands had started to shake. He looked at the number, really looked at it this time. The area code was right, 509, same as Ethan's, but the rest of the digits were wrong. He'd transposed 2 numbers in the middle. Such a small mistake, such a mortifying consequence. He should delete the conversation, apologize briefly and move on. Pretend this humiliating moment had never happened. His finger moved toward the delete button, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the tone of the reply. Not angry or annoyed, just curious. Who is this? A simple question. Or maybe it was the fact that he'd finally said the words, actually typed them out and sent them into the world, and the idea of erasing them felt like erasing his one moment of courage. He typed back, I'm so sorry. Wrong number. Meant to text my son. He hit send before he could overthink it. The reply came quickly. Rough night? Gordon blinked at the screen. That wasn't the response he'd expected. Most people would have left it at no problem or not responded at all. But this stranger had asked a question, had sensed something in his apology. He typed slowly. You could say that. 3 dots appeared, indicating the person was typing. They disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'm sorry. I hope things get better with your son. Gordon felt something crack open in his chest. This stranger, whoever they were, had offered more kindness in 2 messages than he'd received in months. He should thank them and end the conversation. That would be the normal thing to do. Instead, he typed, thank you. It's complicated. He sent it and immediately regretted it. Why was he telling a stranger about his problems? What was wrong with him? But the reply came, family usually is. Gordon found himself typing again. I wasn't there for him when he was growing up. Worked too much. Now I don't know how to fix it. He stared at what he'd written. This was insane. He was having a real conversation with someone whose name he didn't even know. He should stop. But his thumb pressed send anyway. That's honest, came the reply. Most people can't even admit that much to themselves. Gordon read the message twice. There was something gentle in it, something that didn't judge him for his failures. He typed, doesn't make it right. No, but it's a start. They went back and forth like that for 20 minutes. Short messages, careful but genuine. The stranger didn't pry, didn't ask for details Gordon wasn't offering. They just listened, or whatever the text message equivalent of listening was. Finally, the stranger wrote, I should let you go, but for what it's worth, the fact that you're trying to reach out to your son, that matters, even if the message went to the wrong number. Gordon smiled despite himself. Maybe especially because it went to the wrong number. Maybe so. Take care of yourself. Gordon typed, you too. And thank you, really. Any time. He thought that would be the end of it. A strange, brief connection with a kind stranger. Something he'd remember whenever he thought about that embarrassing night he texted his deepest regrets to the wrong person. But then, almost as an afterthought, another message came through. By the way, I just moved back to Riverside. Small world if that's where you are too. Gordon sat up straighter. Riverside. This person lived in Riverside. He typed, I've lived here my whole life. Well, except for 2 years in the army. I grew up here. Left 30 years ago. Just came back last month. Gordon did the math. 30 years ago would have been 1995. He would have been 28, married for 10 years. Ethan would have been a baby. Riverside was small, but not so small that everyone knew everyone. Still, there was something oddly comforting about knowing this stranger was local. That they understood what Riverside was. The quiet streets, the fading downtown, the way the whole town felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something that would never come. Welcome back, he typed. Though I'm not sure there's much to welcome you to these days. It's different. Smaller somehow. But it still feels like home. Gordon understood that. Riverside might be dying slowly, but it was still the only home he'd ever known. The only place where he could walk down Main Street and recognize half the faces he passed, even if he never stopped to talk to them. They exchanged a few more messages about the town. The library had been renovated. The old movie theater was now a church. The diner was still there, same owners, same menu. Small talk, really, but it felt comfortable. Easy in a way that conversation with most people didn't feel anymore. Finally, the stranger wrote, I should really get some sleep. Early shift at the library tomorrow. The library? You work there? Just started last week. Nice to be around books again. Gordon had always liked the library. He'd taken Ethan there when he was little, back when Patricia was alive and insisted on family outings. Ethan had loved the children's section, the big, colourful books about dinosaurs and space. Gordon wondered if those books were still there. "Well, good luck with the new job," he typed. "Thanks, and good luck with your son. I hope you get to send him that message for real." Gordon looked at his phone for a long moment. Then he typed, "Can I ask your name? Just feels strange not to know." A pause. Then Vanessa. "And you?" "Gordon. Nice to meet you, Gordon. Even if it was by accident. Nice to meet you too, Vanessa." They said goodnight after that. Gordon set his phone on the nightstand and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The conversation played through his mind. He'd told a complete stranger things he hadn't said to anyone in years. And somehow it had felt right. Vanessa, that was her name now, a real person, instead of just a wrong number, hadn't tried to fix him or offer empty platitudes. She'd just been there, present in the conversation, offering kindness without asking for anything in return. He wondered what she looked like, how old she was, why she'd left Riverside 30 years ago, and what had brought her back. But those questions felt invasive, like crossing a line he had no right to cross. Still, he saved the conversation instead of deleting it. He told himself it was just in case what, he wasn't sure. But as he drifted off to sleep that night, for the first time in months, he didn't feel quite so alone. His phone sat on the nightstand, the screen dark. Inside it, the conversation remained, a digital record of two strangers who'd found each other by accident and discovered something neither had expected, a moment of genuine human connection in a world that often felt devoid of it. Gordon slept better that night than he had in 3 years. He didn't dream of Patricia or regrets or all the ways he'd failed. He dreamed of nothing at all, which felt like mercy. When he woke at 5:30 the next morning, his first thought was to check his phone. There were no new messages. He felt a small pang of disappointment which surprised him. He set the phone down and went to make coffee, trying not to think about why it mattered. But it did matter. Somehow, in the span of one late-night conversation, it had started to matter very much. 3 days passed before Gordon allowed himself to text Vanessa again. He'd thought about it constantly, while measuring boards for a cabinet job, while eating dinner alone at his kitchen table, while lying in bed at night. He'd draft messages in his head, casual greetings, questions about how she was settling in, comments about the weather. All of them felt forced or desperate, or like he was trying too hard. He told himself he was being ridiculous. It had been one conversation. She'd been kind, but that didn't mean she wanted to hear from him again. She probably had a full life, friends, maybe family. She didn't need some lonely old widower pestering her with text messages. But on Thursday evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sun set behind the Henderson house, he picked up his phone and typed before he could stop himself, "Hope your week's going well." He hit send and immediately regretted it. Too generic. Too boring. She wouldn't respond, and he'd spend the rest of the evening feeling foolish. An hour passed. He'd gone inside, heated up one of Mrs. Kepler's casseroles that he had no appetite for, and was washing his plate when his phone buzzed. "Hi, Gordon. Week's been busy but good. Getting settled into the new place. How are you?" Relief flooded through him, followed quickly by a spike of anxiety. She'd responded. Now he had to keep the conversation going without sounding like an idiot. "Doing all right. Working on a cabinet project. Keeps me busy. You're a carpenter?" "Semi-retired. I take jobs here and there. Mostly custom work now. That's a good skill to have. I can barely hang a picture frame straight." Gordon smiled at his phone. "It's not as hard as people think. Just takes patience and the right tools. 2 things I'm short on these days." They fell into an easy rhythm after that. Vanessa told him about the library, how it had been renovated, but still had the same musty smell she remembered from childhood. How Mrs. Gunderson, who'd been the head librarian 30 years ago, was somehow still there, now in her 80s and stubborn as ever about the Dewey Decimal System. Gordon told her about his work, about the satisfaction of taking a raw piece of wood and turning it into something useful and beautiful. He didn't mention that work was one of the few things that still made him feel competent, that gave him a sense of purpose when everything else in his life felt like failure. "Where are you living?" he asked. "If you don't mind me asking, renting a place on Cedar Street." "Small house, needs some work, but it's mine for now." Gordon knew Cedar Street. It was in the older part of town, near where he'd grown up. The houses there were small, built in the 40s and 50s for mill workers and their families. "I grew up 2 streets over, on Birch." "Really? My house backed up to the woods. I used to spend hours back there as a kid." "Same. Built a tree house when I was 12. Probably still there, falling apart. Some things don't change. But some things did," Gordon thought. Everything changed eventually. Towns shrank. People left or died. Tree houses rotted and fell. You couldn't stop time. Couldn't hold on to anything, no matter how hard you tried. He pushed the dark thoughts away and typed, "What brought you back to Riverside?" If that's not too personal. There was a longer pause before her response came. "Lots of reasons. Needed a change. This felt like the right place to do it." Gordon recognized evasion when he heard it. He'd become an expert at it himself over the years. "Fair enough. It's a quiet place for a fresh start. That's what I'm hoping for." They texted for another 20 minutes before Vanessa said she needed to get to bed. Early shift again in the morning. Gordon thanked her for chatting and meant it more than she could know. The next morning, Gordon had a job at the Fletcher place on the east side of town. Floyd Fletcher was 71. Retired from the railroad, and had decided his garage needed new built-in storage. Gordon had known Floyd casually for years. They'd been in the Rotary Club together back when Gordon had been active in such things. "You're smiling," Floyd said around 10 o'clock, handing Gordon a cup of coffee. "Don't see that much these days." Gordon hadn't realized he was smiling. He'd been thinking about Vanessa's comment about the library smell, how she'd described it as a combination of old paper and floor wax, and something indefinable that was just books. Just in a good mood, I guess. Floyd studied him with shrewd eyes. "Met someone?" "What? No, I mean not like that." Gordon felt his face heat up. "Just a friend. We text sometimes." "Texting, huh? Modern world." Floyd took a sip of his coffee. "My daughter had to teach me how to do that. Still can't figure out those tiny keyboards." "It's not romantic," Gordon insisted. "We barely know each other." "Didn't say it was." Floyd's expression softened. "But I remember that look. Had it myself when I reconnected with Beth after my first wife passed." Gordon hadn't known Floyd had remarried. "I didn't realize. 5 years now. Met her at a grief support group of all places. Thought I was done with all that. Love, companionship, all of it. Figured I'd had my chance, and that was enough." He paused. "Turns out life had other plans." They worked in silence for a while, Gordon measuring and cutting, Floyd handing him tools when needed. Finally, Floyd said, "My daughter stopped talking to me after her mother died. Blame me for not catching it sooner, not making her go to the doctor. Took 3 years before we spoke again." Gordon stopped what he was doing. "What changed?" "I did. Stopped waiting for her to reach out. Stopped thinking I didn't deserve forgiveness. Wrote her a letter, actual letter, not a text or email. Told her I was sorry for failing her mother, for failing her. Told her I wanted to do better." Floyd set down his coffee mug. "She called me 2 days later. We talked for 3 hours. Just like that?" "Not just like that. It was hard. Took time to rebuild the trust. But you can't rebuild anything if you don't start somewhere." Floyd met Gordon's eyes. "Whatever burden you're carrying, it's not going to get lighter by carrying it alone." Gordon nodded slowly. He thought about the message he'd sent to the wrong number, the conversation with Vanessa, the fact that he'd been more honest with a stranger than with his own son. That evening, after Floyd paid him and he'd driven home, Gordon sat in his truck in the driveway for 10 minutes, staring at his phone. Then he pulled up Ethan's number, the right number this time, and pressed call. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Ethan's voice, efficient and professional. "You've reached Ethan Leland. Leave a message." Gordon's throat tightened. "Hey, son. It's Dad. Just wanted to, see how you're doing. Been thinking about you. Give me a call when you get a chance. Love you." He hung up and sat there, feeling the familiar weight of inadequacy. Love you, he'd said it, but the words felt rusty, unpracticed. When was the last time he'd told Ethan he loved him? At Patricia's funeral. Before that, his phone buzzed. For a moment, his heart jumped. Maybe Ethan had been there. Maybe he'd call back right away. But it was Vanessa. Random question. Do you remember the old roller rink on Highway 12? Gordon smiled despite his disappointment. The Galaxy? Closed down in the 90s. I spent every Friday night there in high school. Terrible skater, but loved it anyway. I took my wife there on our third date. Nearly broke my ankle. Some of us are meant to stay on solid ground. They texted back and forth about old riverside landmarks, the drive-in theater that was now a storage facility, the swimming pool at the park that had been filled in and turned into a basketball court, the soda fountain, where you could get a milkshake for $1. As Gordon got ready for bed that night, he checked his phone one more time. No call from Ethan, but there was one last message from Vanessa. Thanks for the trip down memory lane. Sweet dreams, Gordon. He typed back, you too. Vanessa. Then he pulled out his wallet and extracted the photograph he kept there, creased and faded, showing a younger version of himself with 6-year-old Ethan at a baseball game. Both of them smiling, Ethan holding a foam finger that was bigger than his head. Gordon studied the photo for a long time. That man in the picture had no idea how much he was going to lose, how much distance would grow between him and that happy little boy. How many years he'd spend regretting the moments he'd let slip away. But maybe it wasn't too late to start closing that distance. He put the photo back in his wallet and set his phone on the nightstand. Tomorrow he'd try again. And the day after that, and the day after that. However long it took. Some things were worth the wait. 2 weeks became a routine Gordon hadn't planned but found himself depending on. Most evenings, around 7 or 8 o'clock, his phone would buzz with a message from Vanessa. Sometimes she started the conversation, sometimes he did. It didn't seem to matter who went first. The exchange always felt natural, unhurried. They talked about small things mostly. The weather turning colder as October deepened into November. The Halloween decorations appearing on front porches throughout Riverside. The way the maple trees on Main Street had turned brilliant shades of orange and red before dropping their leaves in a single weekend windstorm. Gordon found himself noticing things he wanted to tell her about. The family of deer that had started coming through his backyard at dawn. The way Mrs. Kepler's cat, an ancient tabby named Prudence, had taken to sitting on his porch railing. The sound of geese flying south in formation, their calls echoing across the valley. Small observations, but they made him pay attention to the world again in a way he hadn't in years. Life had become something to endure after Patricia died. Now slowly, it was becoming something to notice again. On a Tuesday evening, while Gordon was replacing a rotted board on his porch steps, Vanessa sent him a photo. It was a view from somewhere high up. The valley spread out below, the river winding through it like a silver ribbon, the town of Riverside clustered along its banks. From the bluff on Miller Road, her message read. Forgot how beautiful this view is. Gordon knew that spot. He and Patricia used to drive up there when they were dating, parking at the overlook to watch the sunset. Later, they'd taken Ethan up there when he was small, letting him run around while they sat on the hood of the car and talked about their dreams for the future. He typed, "Haven't been up there in years. You should go. Best view in the county." Gordon looked at the photo again. In the golden light of late afternoon, Riverside looked almost picturesque, like a postcard of small-town America. You couldn't see the closed storefronts, or the for sale signs, or the way the place was slowly emptying out. You could only see the beauty that remained. "Maybe I will," he wrote back. That night, for the first time since Patricia's death, Gordon opened the garden shed behind his house. It had been Patricia's domain. Shelves full of terracotta pots, bags of soil, seed packets organized by season, hand tools hanging neatly on hooks. He'd avoided it, couldn't bear to see her things, to remember how much joy she'd taken in coaxing things to grow. But now he stood in the doorway, breathing in the smell of earth and old wood. His eyes adjusted to the dimness, and he saw everything just as she'd left it. The trowel she'd used most often, its handle worn smooth. The gardening gloves with dirt still on the fingers. And there, on a high shelf, a leather-bound notebook he didn't recognize. He reached for it carefully, as if it might disintegrate at his touch. The leather was soft with age, the pages yellowed. He opened it and saw Patricia's handwriting, neat, precise, each entry dated. It was her garden journal. Gordon carried it inside and sat at the kitchen table, turning pages slowly. She'd kept records of everything she planted, notes about what thrived and what failed, observations about the weather and the soil and the particular challenges of gardening in the Pacific Northwest. But interspersed with the practical entries were other things, reflections, thoughts about life and growth and patience. On a page dated May 2019, just months before her diagnosis, she'd written, "The roses are struggling this year, but I won't give up on them. Sometimes things need extra time, extra care. Sometimes what looks like it's dying is just gathering strength for the next season." Gordon's throat tightened. Had she known then? Had she felt something wrong in her body and tried to prepare herself through metaphors about gardens? He kept reading. There were entries about Ethan, pride in his accomplishments, worry about his distance, and entries about Gordon. "G has been working so hard lately. I wish he'd slow down, enjoy the present instead of always planning for a future that might not come the way we expect." She'd seen him more clearly than he'd seen himself. She'd known he was running from something, even if he hadn't been able to name it. Running from intimacy, from vulnerability, from the risk of being truly known and found wanting. Gordon's phone buzzed. "Vanessa, you still up?" He wiped his eyes and typed, "Yeah, found something of my wife's, a journal she kept. That must be hard." "It is, but it's good too." Like hearing her voice again. "What was her name?" "If you don't mind me asking." Gordon hesitated. They talked around his loss, acknowledged it without diving deep. But Vanessa had been patient, never pushing. She deserved honesty. "Patricia, we were married 33 years. That's a long time. A good life together. Most of it was good. I have a lot of regrets about how I showed up, or didn't show up. But yes, she was the best thing that ever happened to me." There was a pause before Vanessa's reply came. "I was married once, divorced after 8 years. No children. That was part of the problem. I couldn't have them, and he couldn't forgive me for it." Gordon felt the weight of that confession. She trusted him with something painful, something that had shaped her life. "I'm sorry. That's a cruel thing to blame someone for. It was a long time ago, but it's why I left Riverside. Too many people knew, too many opinions about whose fault it was. I needed to start over somewhere nobody knew my story. And now you're back. Now I'm back. Funny how the place you run from can become the place you need to return to." Gordon understood that more than she knew. He'd never left Riverside physically, but he'd been running all the same, from grief, from guilt, from the hard work of healing. Maybe coming back wasn't always about geography. Maybe sometimes it was about finally stopping long enough to face what you'd been avoiding. He typed, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you came back. Me too. And I'm glad you accidentally texted me that night. Best mistake I ever made." They talked for another hour. Vanessa told him about her marriage, how it had started with real love, but slowly corroded under the weight of disappointment and resentment. How she'd spent years in Portland, working various jobs, building a life that felt safe but ultimately empty. How turning 60 last year had made her reassess everything, made her realize she'd been living in a kind of exile from herself. Gordon shared more about Patricia's illness, about watching helplessly as cancer took her piece by piece, about the guilt of feeling relieved when it was finally over, when her suffering ended, about the greater guilt of realizing her death had freed him from having to be the husband he'd never quite managed to be. "You're being too hard on yourself," Vanessa wrote. "We all have regrets. The question is what we do with them. What do you do with yours?" Still figuring that out. But talking to you helps. When they finally said goodnight, Gordon sat for a long time with Patricia's journal open in front of him. On the last page she'd written in, dated September 2021, 2 months before she died, there was a single sentence. "I hope G finds someone to talk to after I'm gone. He keeps too much inside." Gordon touched the words gently, as if he could reach through time and tell her he'd heard her. That he was trying, that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to let someone in. His phone rang suddenly, startling him. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. Gordon's heart raced as he answered. Ethan. Hey, Dad. Sorry it took me so long to call back. Work's been crazy. That's okay. I'm just glad to hear your voice. There was a pause, awkward but not hostile. Your message sounded, I don't know, different somehow. I've been thinking a lot lately about us, about how I wasn't there for you the way I should have been. Dad, let me say this, please. Gordon took a breath. I know I failed you in a lot of ways. I was so focused on work, on providing, that I forgot the most important thing was just being present. And after your mom died, I didn't know how to bridge the gap I'd created. But I want to try, if you're willing. The silence stretched long enough that Gordon thought the call had dropped. Then Ethan said quietly, I'd like that. The conversation with Ethan lasted 20 minutes. Not long, but longer than they'd talked in years. They spoke carefully, both aware they were navigating fragile ground. Ethan told Gordon about his job in Seattle, software development for a healthcare company. He'd been promoted recently, now led a small team. Gordon listened, asked questions, tried not to let too much time pass between responses. Before they hung up, Ethan said, maybe I could visit sometime. It's been a while since I've seen the old place. Gordon's chest tightened with hope and fear in equal measure. I'd like that. Whenever works for you. Let me check my schedule. Maybe around Thanksgiving? Thanksgiving would be perfect. After the call ended, Gordon sat motionless in Patricia's chair, afraid that moving might somehow undo what had just happened. His son wanted to visit. They'd had a real conversation. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door opening, and that was more than he'd had in a long time. He texted Vanessa, just talk to my son. He might visit for Thanksgiving. Her response came quickly. Gordon, that's wonderful. How do you feel? Terrified. What if I mess it up again? You won't. You're not the same person you were. Neither is he. I hope you're right. I am. Trust me on this. Over the next few days, Gordon thought constantly about Ethan's visit. He started making lists, things that needed to be fixed around the house, meals he could prepare, topics of conversation that might be safe. The lists grew longer and more anxious until he realized he was doing exactly what he'd always done, focusing on the logistics to avoid the emotional reality. Vanessa became his anchor during those days. She'd text him in the mornings before her shift, checking in. She'd send him photos throughout the day, a funny sign at the library, a squirrel stealing someone's lunch on the park bench, the way the afternoon light hit the river. Small reminders that the world continued, that there was beauty in ordinary moments. On Friday evening, she sent him a photo of a pencil sketch. It showed the old bridge that crossed the river at the south end of town, the one everyone called Henderson Bridge, though the actual name had been something else. The drawing was good, detailed but with a softness to it that made it feel like a memory rather than a photograph. Oh, didn't know you were an artist, Gordon texted. Not really, just something I do sometimes. Used to sketch a lot when I was younger. It's beautiful. You captured it perfectly. I spent a lot of time at that bridge as a teenager. It was my thinking spot. Gordon stared at the sketch. Henderson Bridge. He knew it well. That was where he'd proposed to Patricia on a warm June evening in 1984. He'd been 24 years old, nervous enough that he'd nearly dropped the ring into the river. Patricia had laughed and said yes before he'd even finished asking the question. He typed, I proposed to Patricia near that bridge. Feels like a lifetime ago. It's a special place. Something about bridges. They connect things that seem separate. Gordon thought about that. Bridges. Connection. The distance between where you were and where you needed to be. I haven't been there since she died. Couldn't bring myself to go. Too many memories? Too much everything. Felt like if I went back, I'd have to face all the ways I failed her. All the conversations we never had. Maybe that's exactly why you should go. Not to punish yourself, but to make peace with it. Gordon sat with that suggestion for a long time. The idea of going to the bridge filled him with dread and something else, something that might have been longing, to stand in that place again, to remember not just the proposal but all the other times they'd gone there. Walking Ethan when he was a baby, the rhythm of pushing the stroller calming them both. Bringing Patricia there during her treatment, when she needed to see something beautiful that wasn't a hospital room. Maybe, he typed. Someday. No pressure, just a thought. But the thought stayed with him. That night, he pulled out his old photo albums and found pictures from their engagement. Patricia young and radiant, her dark hair long down her back, her smile wide and genuine. Gordon beside her, skinny and nervous-looking, as if he couldn't quite believe his luck. The next morning, without allowing himself to overthink it, Gordon drove to Henderson Bridge. It was a grey Saturday, the kind of northwest morning where the clouds sat so low you felt you could reach up and touch them. The bridge was exactly as he remembered. Old steel and concrete, more functional than beautiful, but solid, enduring. He parked and walked to the middle of the bridge, looking down at the water. The river was high with autumn rains, moving fast and dark. He remembered how different it had looked that June evening, low and lazy, catching the golden light of sunset. Gordon pulled out his phone and texted Vanessa, "I'm at the bridge." Her reply came quickly. "Really? How does it feel?" He thought about how to answer that. "Sad, but not as bad as I thought. I can remember the good things without the grief swallowing me whole. That's progress." He took a photo of the view from the bridge, the river, the trees along its banks, the town visible in the distance. Sent it to her. "Beautiful," she wrote. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Gordon stayed there for almost an hour, letting memories wash over him like the river flowing beneath his feet. Patricia's laughter. The way she'd grabbed his hand after he proposed, squeezing so tight he'd thought she might break his fingers. The walks they'd taken here, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about everything and nothing. But also the harder memories, the times he'd been too busy to walk with her when she'd asked. The conversations he'd cut short because he had to get back to work. The way he'd slowly let the distance grow between them. So gradual he hadn't noticed until it was too late to close. "I'm sorry," he said aloud, though there was no one to hear him. "I'm sorry I didn't do better." The wind picked up, cold against his face. A few drops of rain began to fall. Gordon didn't move. He stood there and let the weather wash over him, let the memories come and go like the river below. And slowly something began to shift. Not forgiveness exactly, he wasn't ready for that. But maybe the beginning of acceptance. Maybe the understanding that he'd done the best he could with what he knew at the time, even if that best hadn't been enough. When he finally got back to his truck, his phone showed several messages from Vanessa. "Take your time. No rush to respond. Hope you're okay." He smiled and typed, "I'm good. Better than I've been in a long time. Thank you for pushing me to do this. I didn't push. You were ready, maybe. Or maybe I needed someone to believe I was ready before I could believe it myself." That evening, Gordon opened Patricia's journal again and began reading from the beginning. This time, instead of pain, he felt gratitude. Gratitude for the years they'd had, imperfect as they were. Gratitude that she'd loved him despite his failings. Gratitude that she'd given him Ethan, even if he'd made a mess of fatherhood. On a blank page at the back of the journal, Gordon picked up a pen, something he hadn't done in years, beyond signing checks. He wrote, "Patricia, I went to the bridge today. I'm trying to do better. I hope that's enough. I hope you'd be proud." He closed the journal and set it on the shelf with her gardening books. Then he picked up his phone and texted Ethan, "Looking forward to Thanksgiving. There's a lot I want to tell you." Ethan's response came an hour later. "Me too, Dad, me too." 6 weeks after the wrong number text, Gordon's life had developed a rhythm he hadn't known was possible. Morning coffee on the porch, work in the shop or at job sites, evening conversations with Vanessa that had become as essential as breathing. They'd never talked on the phone. Something about the distance of text messages felt safer for both of them. But the messages themselves had grown longer, more personal, more honest. Vanessa mentioned her younger years in Riverside more frequently now. Growing up in a house near the old fairgrounds, her parents who'd been strict, religious, disappointed in her choices. A falling out when she was 19 that had never truly healed. By the time her parents passed, her father in 2008, her mother in 2015, too much time had gone by, too many words left unsaid. Gordon understood that kind of regret intimately. "Do you have any siblings?" he asked one evening. The reply took longer than usual. "I had a sister, older. We were close when we were young, but the family situation drove us apart. I haven't spoken to her in over 30 years. That's a long time to carry that weight." "I know. I think about reaching out sometimes, but I don't even know if she'd want to hear from me. And even if I knew where to find her, what would I say? Sorry I disappeared for 3 decades. Oh, Gordon thought about his own estrangement from Ethan, how the years had piled up until the distance felt insurmountable. Maybe that's exactly what you say. Sometimes simple honesty is all we have. You're probably right. But knowing what to do and having the courage to do it are different things. I know that better than anyone." They talked about courage that night, how it meant different things at different stages of life. When you were young, courage was taking risks, chasing dreams, believing the world would catch you if you fell. When you were older, courage was admitting you were wrong, asking for forgiveness, trying again when every previous attempt had failed. "What scares you most about Ethan visiting?" Vanessa asked. Gordon had to think about that. "That I'll revert to who I was. That I'll freeze up and not be able to say the things I need to say. That I'll lose this chance and there won't be another one." "You won't freeze up. You're not the same person anymore." "How do you know?" "Because the person you were wouldn't have sent that text in the first place. Wouldn't have opened up to a stranger. Wouldn't have gone to the bridge. You've already changed, Gordon. You just have to trust it." He wanted to believe her. But doubt was a stubborn companion, especially in the quiet hours before dawn, when old fears had the loudest voices. Mrs. Kepler noticed something was different about him. She said as much when she brought over a pot roast on Tuesday evening, letting herself in through the kitchen door, the way she always did. "You've got color in your face again," she observed, setting the dish on the counter. "And you're not shuffling around like death warmed over." "Didn't realize I was shuffling." "You were. For 3 years you shuffled." She turned to look at him directly. "Something's changed." "Or someone has?" Gordon felt his face warm. "I've been talking to someone, a friend. It's nothing romantic." Mrs. Kepler's eyebrows rose. "Did I say it was romantic? You said that all on your own. Because I know how people think in this town. Someone sneezes and by dinner time they're engaged. Well, romantic or not, it's good for you. A person needs companionship. Need someone to talk to who isn't a 76-year-old woman bringing casseroles." "I appreciate the casseroles." "No, you don't. You throw out half of them. I've seen my Tupperware in your recycling bin." But she smiled when she said it. "Just don't wait too long to tell this person how you feel, whatever those feelings are. At our age, we don't have time to waste." After she left, Gordon thought about her words. How did he feel about Vanessa? They'd never met in person. Never heard each other's voices. For all he knew, she could be texting him from the other side of the world instead of from somewhere in Riverside. But the connection was real. He knew that much. She'd become someone he trusted, someone he could be honest with in ways he'd never managed with anyone else. Was that love? He didn't know. It had been so long since he'd felt anything close to love that he wasn't sure he'd recognize it anymore. That night, Vanessa sent him a message that shifted something between them. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever think about what comes next? Not just with Ethan, but for you. What your life looks like going forward?" Gordon stared at the question for a long time. "I try not to think too far ahead. The present is hard enough. I understand that. But I've been thinking about it a lot lately. About what I want the rest of my life to look like. I spent so many years just surviving, just getting through each day. Now I want more than that. I want to actually live. What does that look like for you?" "Honestly, I don't know yet. But I think it involves letting people in, being vulnerable, taking risks I've been too scared to take." A pause, then. "It probably involves meeting the person I've been texting with for 6 weeks. If he's willing." Gordon's heart hammered against his ribs. She wanted to meet. Of course she did. It was the natural progression of any friendship. But the thought terrified him. What if the connection they'd built through text messages evaporated in person? What if he was awkward or boring or not what she expected? What if she took one look at him and realized she'd made a mistake? He typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, "I'd like that. But I'm nervous." "Me too. We don't have to rush it. But maybe someday soon, when you're ready. When we're both ready." Yes, when we're both ready. They left it at that, an agreement that they'd eventually bridge the distance between their phones and real life. But not yet, not quite yet. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Gordon cleaned the house from top to bottom, something he should have been doing all along but hadn't had the energy for. He fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom, replaced the burned-out bulbs in the hallway, patched the holes in the drywall from where Patricia had hung pictures that he'd taken down after she died. He was making the house presentable for Ethan, but he realized he was also making it presentable for himself, reclaiming it from the fog of grief that had settled over everything for 3 years. Vanessa checked in daily, offering encouragement and gentle humor when his anxiety spiked. She sent him recipes for Thanksgiving dinner, told him stories about library patrons that made him laugh, reminded him that he was doing better than he thought. "You've got this," she wrote on the Monday before Thanksgiving. "And if you need backup, I'm here." Gordon read that message several times. Backup. He'd been alone for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone in his corner, someone who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. "Thank you," he typed, "for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you these past weeks. You would have figured it out. But I'm glad I could be here." That night, Gordon stood in what would be Ethan's room, his old childhood bedroom that had become a storage space for things Gordon didn't know what to do with. He began clearing it out, boxing up the remnants of a life that no longer fit, making space for something new. It was time. Gordon woke on the Wednesday morning before Thanksgiving with a decision already made. He would go to the library. He would finally see Vanessa in person. The decision had crystallized overnight, born from equal parts courage and desperation. Ethan was arriving tomorrow, and Gordon realized he wanted to tell his son about this connection he'd made. But he couldn't describe someone he'd never actually met, couldn't explain how important she'd become when their entire relationship existed in pixels on a screen. He dressed carefully, not his work clothes, but the nicer jeans and the button-down shirt he'd worn to Patricia's funeral and hadn't touched since. His hands shook as he combed his hair, as he checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He looked like what he was, a 62-year-old man who'd lived hard and lonely and was trying, perhaps too late, to find his way back to the world. The library was quiet when he arrived just after 10. The building had been renovated since he'd last been inside. New carpet, fresh paint, better lighting. But it still smelled the way Vanessa had described. Old paper and floor wax, and something indefinable that was just books. He walked toward the circulation desk, his heart hammering so hard he wondered if it was visible through his shirt. There was a woman there, her back to him, sorting through returned books. Average height, grey-streaked brown hair pulled back in a loose knot, wearing a cardigan the color of burgundy wine. Gordon cleared his throat. "Excuse me?" The woman turned around. The world tilted. He knew that face. Not from imagination or speculation about what Vanessa might look like. He knew it because he'd seen it before, in photographs Patricia had kept hidden, in a box at the back of her closet. In a single framed picture she'd kept in her desk drawer that she thought Gordon hadn't known about. The woman had Patricia's eyes, Patricia's cheekbones, the same shape to her mouth, though this woman's face was thinner, more weathered. She was older than Patricia had been when she died, maybe by 5 or 6 years, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Gordon's hands went numb. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. The woman was looking at him with polite inquiry, waiting for him to speak, and he couldn't form words. He turned and walked out. Behind him he heard her voice, warm, concerned. "Sir, are you all right?" But he was already pushing through the door, into the cold November air, his breath coming in short gasps. He made it to his truck and sat in the driver's seat with shaking hands, trying to understand what he'd just seen. The name badge. He'd seen it in that brief moment before his mind went blank. Vanessa Pruitt, Patricia's maiden name. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and found one of Patricia's photo albums on his cloud storage, something Ethan had helped him set up years ago. He scrolled through until he found what he was looking for, an old picture, faded and grainy, showing Patricia around age 20 with a teenage girl. Sisters at a family barbecue, both squinting into the sun, Patricia's arm around the younger girl's shoulders. He zoomed in on the teenager's face. Even through the years and the low quality of the photo, he could see it. The same person who'd just turned to face him at the library circulation desk. Vanessa was Patricia's sister. Gordon's mind raced backward through their conversations. Vanessa had mentioned having a sister she hadn't spoken to in 30 years. She'd said she left Riverside after a falling out with her family. She'd asked about his wife, with what he'd thought was gentle curiosity, but now realized might have been something else entirely. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "I saw you at the library today. We need to talk." So she'd recognized him, had seen him flee. Maybe she'd known all along who he was. Maybe the whole thing had been, a game? Some kind of strange attempt to reconnect with her sister's widower. Gordon's hurt hardened into anger. He'd opened up to her, trusted her with things he hadn't told anyone, and she'd been lying to him from the start. He drove home in a fog, his thoughts spinning. Inside the house, he pulled out every box of Patricia's things he'd kept. There had to be more information. Letters, photos, something that would help him understand. In a box labeled personal papers, he found what he was looking for. Letters, dozens of them, exchanged between Patricia and Vanessa in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The handwriting in the return addresses matched the sketches Vanessa had sent him. Gordon read through them, piecing together a story Patricia had never fully shared with him. Vanessa had married young against their parents' wishes. The husband had been Catholic when the family was strict Baptist, and that had caused a rift. Patricia had tried to maintain relationships with both Vanessa and their parents, but eventually the parents had forced her to choose. Patricia had chosen the parents, and Vanessa had left. The letters showed Patricia's anguish over the choice, her attempts to reconcile everyone, her ultimate failure. The last letter was dated 1993. "Please don't cut me out of your life. I know I failed you. I know I should have stood up to them. But you're my sister and I love you. Please write back." There was no response in the collection. Gordon kept searching and found something that made his breath catch. An envelope sealed, addressed to Vanessa Pruitt at a Portland address. The postmark date was from August 2021, 4 months before Patricia died. His hands shook as he opened it. The letter inside was written in Patricia's increasingly unsteady handwriting from near the end. "Dear Vanessa, I don't know if this will reach you or if you'll read it if it does. But I'm dying, and I can't leave this world without trying one more time. I was wrong. Wrong to choose our parents over you. Wrong to let them dictate who I could love. Wrong to let 30 years pass without fighting harder to find you, to apologize, to make things right. You were 19 and in love, and they punished you for it. I should have defended you. Instead, I abandoned you when you needed me most. I've carried that guilt every day since. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm sorry, that I've always loved you. That not a week has gone by when I haven't thought about you and wondered if you were happy, if you were safe, if you ever thought about me. If you ever come back to Riverside, Gordon will be here. He's a good man, better than he thinks he is. And Ethan, your nephew, is wonderful. You would have loved being his aunt. I'm sorry I never sent the other letters. I'm sorry I waited until it was too late. Your sister, Patricia." Gordon's vision blurred with tears. Patricia had tried to reach out, had died with this letter unsealed, unsent, her final attempt at reconciliation incomplete. His phone buzzed again. "Vanessa, please, Gordon. Let me explain. I didn't know at first. By the time I realized who you were, I didn't know how to tell you without losing what we'd built. I'm sorry. Please give me a chance to explain in person." Gordon stared at the message, at Patricia's letter, at the evidence of 3 decades of family pain spread across his kitchen table. He typed, "Henderson Bridge, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Her response came immediately, "I'll be there. Thank you." Gordon didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Patricia's letter on the nightstand beside him, his phone dark and silent. His mind wouldn't settle, kept circling through the same questions. When had Vanessa realized who he was? Had she been searching for him specifically when she moved back to Riverside? Had every conversation been calculated, manipulated? But even as the questions multiplied, he remembered the honesty in her messages, the vulnerability she'd shown when talking about her failed marriage, her loneliness, her regrets. Those things felt real. If she'd been playing a part, she was the best actor he'd ever encountered. At 5:30, he gave up on sleep and made coffee. Outside, the world was still dark, the kind of deep November darkness that made it hard to believe morning would ever come. He sat at the kitchen table and read Patricia's letter again, trying to see it through Vanessa's eyes. What would it have felt like to receive this, if she ever had? To know your sister had been thinking of you, had wanted reconciliation, but had waited until it was too late. He thought about Ethan arriving this afternoon, about how he'd planned to introduce Vanessa to share this new connection he'd made. Now everything was complicated in ways he couldn't begin to untangle. His phone buzzed at 7. Vanessa, I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, but I couldn't sleep. I need you to know that what we've shared these past weeks, that was real. Whatever else was confused or wrong, that was real. Gordon stared at the message. His anger from yesterday had cooled into something more complex. Hurt, yes, but also curiosity. And underneath it all, a thread of the connection they'd built that refused to break despite everything. He typed, I believe you. See you at 9. The drive to Henderson Bridge took 15 minutes. Gordon arrived early, parked, and walked to the spot where he'd stood weeks ago when Vanessa had first encouraged him to come here. The morning was cold and grey, threatening rain but not yet delivering it. The river moved below, swollen with autumn storms, carrying debris downstream, branches, leaves, the detritus of seasonal change. At 9 o'clock exactly, he heard footsteps on the bridge behind him. He didn't turn around, not yet. Thank you for coming, Vanessa said. Her voice was lower than he'd imagined, rougher around the edges, real. I almost didn't. I wouldn't have blamed you. She came to stand beside him at the railing, careful to leave space between them. I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times since yesterday. Now that I'm here, I don't know where to start. Start with the truth, all of it. Vanessa took a breath. I left Riverside in 1993. I was 19, married to a man my parents hated, and they gave me an ultimatum. Leave him or lose the family. Patricia tried to mediate, but eventually she had to choose too. She chose them. I know. I found the letters. Then you know it destroyed me. Not just losing my parents, but losing her. She was my best friend, my protector when we were kids. And when I needed her most, she wasn't there. Gordon heard the old pain in her voice, still raw after 30 years. She tried to reach you. At the end? I know. A mutual friend told me Patricia had died, that there'd been a funeral. I was in Portland. I'd spent 30 years building a life there, convincing myself I didn't need family, didn't need roots. When I heard she was gone, something broke in me. Vanessa's voice caught. I'd always thought there would be time, that someday we'd find our way back to each other. And then suddenly, there was no someday. So you came back, 6 months ago. I got a job at the library, rented a place, tried to figure out why I'd returned to a town that held nothing but painful memories. She turned to look at him for the first time. Then one night, I got a text from a wrong number. Someone pouring their heart out about failing their son, about regret and lost time. I didn't know who it was. I just knew they were hurting in a way I understood. When did you realize? The third or fourth message when you mentioned your late wife. I looked up your number, did an internet search. Found an old obituary for Patricia that mentioned her husband Gordon. I saw your name and I knew. Gordon's hands tightened on the railing. Why didn't you tell me? I was going to. That first night I drafted the message, I'm your wife's sister. But then I thought about how that would change everything. How you'd see me as Patricia's abandoned sister instead of just Vanessa. How all the walls would go up. She paused. And I thought, maybe this is a gift. Maybe we can know each other as we are now, without the weight of all that history. That wasn't your choice to make. I know, and I'm sorry. As the weeks went on and we got closer, it became harder to tell you. I knew revealing the truth would hurt you, would make you question everything we'd built. But I also knew I couldn't let it go on forever. She looked back at the river. When you walked into the library yesterday, I thought maybe it was meant to happen that way. That fate was taking the choice out of my hands. Gordon didn't believe in fate, but he believed in the expression on her face when she turned around yesterday. Surprise and something that looked like recognition, as if she'd been waiting for him, even though she couldn't have known he was coming. Patricia wrote you a letter, he said, before she died. She never sent it. Vanessa went very still. What did it say? That she was sorry, that she'd made the wrong choice, that she'd carried the guilt of losing you every day for 30 years. Gordon pulled the letter from his jacket pocket and held it out. She wanted you to know Ethan, wanted you to be part of his life. Vanessa took the letter with shaking hands. She unfolded it carefully as if it might disintegrate. Gordon watched as she read, saw tears begin to track down her face. When she finished, she pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. I wanted to hate her, she whispered. For so many years I wanted to hate her, but I never could. She was my sister. She was afraid, Gordon said. Afraid of our parents' judgment, afraid of doing the wrong thing. I understand that kind of fear. I've lived with it my whole life. We're a pair, aren't we? Both of us carrying around decades of guilt and regret. Maybe that's why we connected. Maybe we recognized something in each other. Vanessa wiped her eyes and looked at him directly. In the grey morning light, he could see Patricia in her features, but he could also see the differences. This was her own person, shaped by different choices and different pain. Can you forgive me for not telling you sooner? Gordon thought about the past 6 weeks, the conversations that had brought him back to life. The way Vanessa had helped him prepare for Ethan's visit, had encouraged him to go to the bridge, had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I want to try. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but Patricia wanted us to know each other. And despite everything, I'm glad we do. They stood in silence, watching the river flow beneath them. After a long moment, Vanessa said, When does Ethan arrive? This afternoon. I haven't told him about you yet. Are you going to? Gordon considered. Yes, but I need to figure out how. This is complicated. Everything worth having is. They stood on the bridge for another 20 minutes, not talking much, just being present with each other and with the weight of what they'd shared. Finally, Vanessa pulled out her phone and showed Gordon a photo, an old Polaroid she'd kept all these years. 2 young girls, maybe 8 and 13, sitting on a porch swing. Patricia and Vanessa before everything fell apart. We were best friends, Vanessa said quietly. People used to say we didn't act like sisters. We were too close, too in sync. I thought nothing could ever come between us. Life comes between people. It's what it does best. But it can also bring people together, even in the strangest ways. She looked at him. A wrong number. What are the odds? Gordon had been thinking about that. In a town as small as Riverside, the odds weren't as astronomical as they seemed. Same area code, similar exchanges. But still, out of all the possible numbers he could have mistyped, he'd found Patricia's sister, the sister she'd been trying to reach at the end. Maybe there was something to the idea of fate after all. I need to get home, he said. Get the house ready. Ethan's flight lands at 2. Of course. I've taken enough of your time. Vanessa, Gordon stopped, unsure what he wanted to say. Would you be willing to meet him? Not today, not during Thanksgiving, but after when things settle. He should know he has an aunt. That Patricia wanted that. Vanessa's eyes filled with fresh tears. I'd like that very much. It won't be easy. There's a lot to explain, I know, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm here now and I'm staying. They exchanged phone numbers again, this time with full knowledge of who they were to each other. Gordon climbed into his truck and watched Vanessa walk to her car, a small sedan parked at the far end of the bridge. She looked back once before getting in, raised her hand in a small wave. He returned it. The drive home felt different than the drive there. The anger had burned away, leaving something more complicated in its place. Hurt, yes. Confusion about what came next. But also a strange sense of rightness, as if pieces were finally falling into place in a pattern he couldn't quite see yet. At home, Gordon threw himself into preparation. He vacuumed the guest room, changed the sheets, made sure there were clean towels in the bathroom. He'd bought groceries yesterday. A turkey, potatoes, green beans, all the traditional Thanksgiving items. Patricia had always made pumpkin pie from scratch. Gordon had bought one from the grocery store bakery. Some traditions you couldn't recreate. At 1:30, his phone rang. Ethan. "Hey, Dad, flight just landed. Getting my bag now. Good flight? Long. I forgot how many connections it takes to get to Riverside. I can pick you up at the airport. Already got a rental car. I'll be there in about 40 minutes. After they hung up, Gordon sat on the couch and tried to calm his racing heart. This was it. His son was coming home. They'd have 4 days together. 4 days to bridge a gap that had been widening for 27 years. 4 days to undo the damage of a lifetime of absence and silence. The doorbell rang at 2:15. Gordon opened it to find his son standing on the porch, overnight bag in hand. Ethan looked good, older than Gordon remembered. When had that happened? But healthy. He wore jeans and a fleece jacket, his dark hair cut short, Patricia's eyes looking out from his face. Gordon saw her so clearly in that moment, it took his breath away. "Hi, Dad." "Ethan, come in, please." The hug was awkward, brief, but it was something. They stood in the entryway for a moment, neither quite sure what to do next. "Place looks good," Ethan said. "You've been keeping it up." "Trying to." "Your room's ready." "Same one as always." "Thanks." Ethan set his bag down. "Smells different in here. Less like—" He stopped. "Less like your mother," Gordon finished. "I know. Some of her things are still around, but the smell faded. I tried to keep it, but I couldn't." Ethan nodded, his throat working. "Can I see the garden?" "A garden?" "Of course." They walked through the house to the back door. The garden was mostly bare now, winter coming on, but Gordon had been maintaining it. Not the way Patricia had. He didn't have her knowledge or her touch, but he'd kept the weeds down, protected the perennials, tried to honor what she'd built. "You found her journal," Ethan said, noticing it on the kitchen counter as they passed. "A few weeks ago, in the shed. She wrote about you a lot. How proud she was. I wish I'd been here more. At the end, she knew you loved her. That's what mattered." They stood in the garden, looking at the dormant beds, the empty spaces where flowers would bloom again in spring. Gordon thought about growth cycles, about how things that looked dead were often just waiting for the right conditions to come back to life. "There's something I need to tell you," Gordon said. "Something unexpected that's happened." Ethan turned to face him. "Okay. I've been talking to someone. A woman named Vanessa. We met by accident. I sent a text to the wrong number. She lives here in Riverside. We've become friends. That's good, Dad. You shouldn't be alone all the time. There's more." It turns out, Gordon took a breath. She's your mother's sister, your Aunt Vanessa. They were estranged for 30 years, and I didn't know until yesterday. Ethan stared at him. "Mom had a sister?" "She did. And your mother wanted you to know her. She tried to reach out before she died, but never got the chance." Gordon pulled out Patricia's letter and handed it to his son. "I think you should read this." Ethan read the letter slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something that looked like grief reopening. When he finished, he read it again. Gordon stood quietly, giving his son space to process. "I had an aunt," Ethan said finally. "All this time I had an aunt and nobody told me. Your mother was protecting you from the family pain. Or maybe protecting herself. I'm not sure anymore. What's she like?" "This Vanessa." Gordon thought about how to answer. "She's kind, thoughtful. She's been through a lot, a difficult marriage, years of loneliness. She came back to Riverside looking for something she couldn't name. Then I accidentally texted her and we started talking. And you had no idea who she was?" "Not at first. Neither did she. By the time we both realized, we'd already built something. A friendship. Maybe more than that, I don't know." Gordon met his son's eyes. I know this is a lot to take in on top of everything else. Ethan folded the letter carefully and handed it back. Does she want to meet me? Very much. But only if you're comfortable with it. Did Mom really write about me in her journal? The question caught Gordon off guard. She did. Want to see? They went inside, and Gordon retrieved Patricia's garden journal from the shelf. He'd marked several pages with sticky notes, entries that mentioned Ethan. His son sat at the kitchen table and began reading, his finger tracing his mother's handwriting as if he could touch her through the ink. Listen to this, Ethan said. May 2020, Ethan called today. He sounded tired. I worry he works too much, just like his father. I wish I could tell him it's okay to slow down, to enjoy life instead of always chasing the next goal. But he's so far away, and I'm so tired these days. Maybe when I'm feeling better, I'll visit him in Seattle. Show him his mother can still be spontaneous. Ethan's voice cracked on the last sentence. She never got to visit. No, the cancer moved too fast. I should have come home more. I should have made time. Gordon sat across from his son. I've spent 3 years thinking the same thing about all my failures. What I should have done differently, how I should have been better. It doesn't change anything. It just keeps you stuck in the past. So what do? We do better now. We show up for each other. We say the things that need saying while we still can. Gordon's hands trembled slightly on the table. That's why I sent you that text. The wrong one that started all this. I was finally ready to tell you I'm sorry. Sorry for not being there when you were growing up. Sorry for being so caught up in work and my own fears that I missed most of your childhood. Sorry for the distance between us that I created and didn't know how to fix. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I was angry at you for a long time. Angry that you were never at my games, never helped with homework, never seemed interested in my life. Mom made excuses for you, said you were providing for us. But I just wanted my dad. The words landed like physical blows, each one true, each one deserved. I know, I failed you, but you're here now. You're trying. That has to count for something. Ethan reached across the table, his hand stopping halfway. Gordon met him there, their fingers clasping awkwardly. I'm willing to try too. If you are. I am. I want to know you, Ethan, the man you've become. I want to be your father if you'll let me. They sat like that. Hands joined across the kitchen table, where Patricia had fed them countless meals, where she'd held this family together through sheer force of will and love. Gordon felt her presence in the room, felt her approval like a warm hand on his shoulder. Tell me about Seattle, Gordon said. About your life there. And Ethan did. He talked about his job, the projects he was leading, the team he'd built. He talked about his apartment with a view of Puget Sound, about hiking in the Cascades on weekends, about a woman he'd been seeing casually but wasn't sure had a future. He talked and Gordon listened, really listened, in a way he'd never managed when Ethan was young. As afternoon faded toward evening, Gordon made dinner. Nothing fancy, pasta with marinara sauce, garlic bread, salad from a bag, but they ate together at the table, and the conversation continued. Ethan asked about Gordon's carpentry work, about the town, about how he'd been managing. Honestly, I was barely managing until a few weeks ago. Then the wrong number text happened, and Vanessa started responding, and something shifted. She gave me someone to talk to, someone who listened without judgment. I'm glad you found her. Even if the circumstances were weird, life is weird. The older I get, the more I realize there's no normal path. We just stumble through and hope we find good people along the way. After dinner, they sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in jackets, watching darkness settle over the neighborhood. Mrs. Kepler's lights were on across the street. The Henderson house stood empty and dark. Somewhere in town, Vanessa was probably in her small rental on Cedar Street, wondering how this day had gone. Gordon pulled out his phone and texted her, told Ethan he wants to meet you. Maybe Saturday? Her response came quickly. I'd be honored. Thank you, Gordon, for everything. Thank you for answering a wrong number. Best mistake you ever made. Gordon smiled and put his phone away. Beside him, Ethan said, Was that her? Yes. I'm nervous about meeting her. So is she. But I think Mom would want this, would want us all to be family. Then we'll make it happen. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the first real snow of the season, light flurries that wouldn't stick, but transformed Riverside into something softer, gentler. Gordon woke early out of habit and found Ethan already in the kitchen making coffee. "Couldn't sleep?" Gordon asked. "Too much on my mind. Good things, though." "That's new." Ethan handed his father a mug. "Want help with the turkey?" They worked together in the kitchen, Gordon teaching Ethan Patricia's method for preparing the bird, the herb butter under the skin, the way she'd tucked lemon and onion inside the cavity. It was the first time they'd cooked together since Ethan was a child, and the rhythm came easier than Gordon expected. "Mom tried to teach me this once," Ethan said, washing potatoes at the sink. "I was 16, home for Thanksgiving break from debate camp. I told her I didn't have time. She never mentioned it. She wouldn't have. She never made me feel bad about stuff like that." Ethan's hands stilled in the water. "I wish I'd paid more attention, learned more from her while I could. I wish that about a lot of things. But beating ourselves up doesn't honor her memory. Living better does." They worked in companionable silence after that, falling into an easy division of labor. Gordon put the turkey in the oven while Ethan started on the side dishes. The house filled with the smells of cooking, rosemary, sage, butter, the rich aroma of roasting meat. It was the first time in 3 years the house had smelled like Thanksgiving. Round noon, Gordon's phone rang. "Vanessa, I know we said Saturday," she began, "but I was wondering, would it be completely inappropriate if I brought something by today?" "Pumpkin pie? I made 2 and have no one to share them with." Gordon looked at Ethan, who was listening unabashedly. His son nodded. "Come at 1, Gordon said. "Stay for dinner if you'd like." A pause. "Are you sure?" "We're sure." "It's time." Vanessa arrived at 1 o'clock exactly, carrying 2 pies and wearing a navy dress that looked carefully chosen. Gordon saw her hesitate on the porch before knocking, saw her gather her courage. He understood that feeling intimately now. He opened the door before she could knock. "Come in, please." She stepped inside, and Gordon saw her take in the house with hungry eyes. Patricia's house, the home her sister had made. Her gaze caught on a photograph on the hall table. Patricia, Gordon, and young Ethan at the beach, all of them sunburned and laughing. "She was happy here," Gordon said quietly. "I'm glad." "I always hoped she was." Vanessa turned as Ethan appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. The resemblance between aunt and nephew was subtle but present, something in the set of their shoulders, the shape of their hands. "Ethan," she said, her voice catching, "you look so much like your mother. People say I have her eyes." He extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it and pulled her into an awkward hug. "It's strange meeting you." "Good strange. For me too. I've missed so much of your life." "We've all missed too much," Gordon said. "But we're here now." They moved to the living room, the conversation tentative at first. Vanessa told Ethan stories about his mother as a child, how she'd been afraid of thunderstorms but pretended to be brave, how she'd wanted to be a veterinarian until she discovered she was allergic to most animals, how she'd once convinced Vanessa to cut their own hair with disastrous results. "Mom never told me any of this," Ethan said, laughing. "She probably wanted to forget the haircut incident. We looked like we'd been attacked by lawnmowers." The stories continued through dinner. Gordon had worried the meal would be awkward, but instead it felt natural. 3 people who shared grief and blood and history finding their way towards something new. Vanessa told them about her years in Portland, the quiet life she'd built. Ethan shared stories about Seattle, about learning to be an adult far from home. Gordon talked about his carpentry work, about the satisfaction of creating something with his hands. When they'd finished eating and the dishes were cleared, Gordon brought out Patricia's journal and the unsent letter. "I think you should have these," he said to Vanessa. "They were meant for you." Vanessa held the journal like it was made of glass. "I can't take her journal. You can read it here whenever you want. But the letter, that's yours. She wrote it for you." After Vanessa left that evening, carrying Patricia's letter and a promise to return Saturday for a proper visit, Gordon and Ethan sat on the porch again. The snow had stopped, leaving the world clean and quiet. "This was a good day," Ethan said. "It was. Your mother would have loved seeing us all together." "I think she knew." Somehow she knew we'd find our way here. Ethan pulled out his phone. "Can we take a picture? I want to remember this," Gordon called Vanessa back. She returned minutes later, still in her coat, and the three of them stood in the living room while Ethan set up his phone on the mantel. The timer counted down, and they smiled, uncertain but genuine, a family finding its shape. Later, alone in his room, Gordon looked at the photo Ethan had sent him. 3 people connected by love and loss, and one wrong number that had changed everything. He thought about the text he'd sent weeks ago, meant for his son, but finding his wife's sister instead. How that single mistake had led here, to reconciliation, to family, to hope. He typed a message to Ethan, "Thank you for coming home," and to Vanessa, "Thank you for answering." Then he set his phone aside and looked around his bedroom. Patricia's reading glasses on the nightstand, her photograph on the dresser, her presence still woven into every corner. But now there was something else too. The possibility of a future that honored the past without being trapped by it. Gordon fell asleep thinking about next Thanksgiving, about the family that was building itself from broken pieces, about second chances and wrong numbers, and the strange grace of finding connection in the least expected places. Some mistakes, it turned out, were exactly what you needed.